Welcome back to the Change the Game podcast, where we are changing the game by doing business differently. And we're highlighting stories of capitalism at its best. I'm Steve Baker. And as always, we've got Rich Armstrong, president of the Great Game of Business here and co-author of our new book, Get in the Game. Hi, Rich.
Hey, Steve. I'm doing good. How are you?
Very good. In fact, I am titillated because today we have got two layers of awesomeness happening. We've got our special guest, Martin Babinec. I'll introduce him in a moment, but we've also got a guest co-host, Jack Stack, our founder and CEO of SRC Holdings. Hello, Jack.
Hello, Steve. Hello, Rich. And hello, Martin.
Hello, Jack, Steve, and Rich. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. For our listeners, they may not know this, but Martin, you've been around the Great Game community for a long time. You've been a successful entrepreneur, venture capitalist, founder of several not-for-profit organizations. We know you as the founder, CEO, and board member of Trinet Group Incorporated, and longtime friend and proponent of the game. Martin, your new book, More Good Jobs, an Entrepreneur's Action Plan to Create Change in Your Community, sounds amazing. Why don't we start out? Tell us a little bit about the new book.
Well, let's say the book reflects a goal on my part to help other people in their communities engage and support entrepreneurs starting and growing companies. So you might say, I'm an entrepreneur that believes a lot in helping other people become entrepreneurs and grow successful companies because of the impact that successful companies can have in changing lives, and improving families and making a difference in their communities. So I'm a fervent believer of that. And it's thanks to the exposure of the Great Game of Business going back many years that helped crystallize the thinking for that being a major goal for my life. And so launching the book and going through that process forced me to think hard about, well, what does that really mean, and how can I help get that message out and help others make progress along similar lines?
I love it. That ties beautifully into our mission of transforming 10 million lives in 10 years. And I know that you and Jack have a lot of history, and there's just preparing for this podcast. It was great to hear you guys talking. Jack, I'd like to invite you to maybe start that conversation again. I'd like to capture some of the ideas that were being thrown around.
Well, as you were introducing Martin, one of the first things that really came into my mind was when this concept that I guess we both feel very strongly about started so many years ago. It was a totally experimental stage of the game. It's when we put it together. And I think Martin is a perfect example when I talk about people about who has really built this and try to grow the idea. And I remember countless number of hours at the very early, now probably very, very middle 90s, okay, where we used to have a tremendous amount of discussion on what was right, what was wrong, and what could we do better. And, I would tell you that he was probably a founder of the whole idea of the Great Game because of his inputs, and not only in the demonstration of the company that he started, okay, but also we had a lot of discussions about the growth of a successful company. We went from the very, very beginning of sharing information to the very beginning of sharing the how you provide equity, how you go from 100% and engage other people in terms of the community and not feel guilty about losing the 100% that you have, and how do you best handle that kind of an opportunity. And then to be with him today and seeing how, as a founder, he's gone from 100% and he's got now 1%. He was always about creating the bigger pie. I mean, he never was just thinking about how do I make my piece of the pie really big, better. He wanted to make everybody's piece of the pie get him. So we had a lot in common in terms of trying to figure out how to diversify the opportunities and make sure people were understanding what it was we were doing. And I think a lot of times at the very beginning, they thought we were crazy. Okay. I mean, I thought he was crazy for sure, because he had this unbelievable idea that I couldn't even understand. And that was what was really bad about it, is that this goes back to the Inc days, Inc magazine days. And one of Inc's favorites was a guy named Tom Golisano, who ran Paychecks. Okay. And, it's obviously Martin had a similar idea. Okay. But little did anybody realize that while everybody was promoting Paychecks, Martin went on to be like an Inc. 500 fastest growing company winner 5 times. And I don't know of anybody in the history of that Inc. 500, I think that 5,000 that was on it 5 times as the fastest growing company in America. So, and I got to be able to, work with him and talk with him. And he's probably one of the smartest guys in terms of, by the time I got done talking to Martin in the early days, I was exhausted. Like, I had no friggin' idea what this guy's thinking was, where he was at. I mean, one day he was domestic, the next day he was international. He was dealing with so many variables in terms of compensation, in terms of employee benefits and programming styles and keeping his overhead down and running out of cash flow. And I mean, it was like the kitchen was on fire every time you were around. and I was always looking for, well, where's the exhaust? Where do you even start? And, to be able to see what he has done today and to be able to set the groundwork as a validation that this is achievable. I mean, you can't take it away. Now, all we can do is try to figure out is that how do you bring this shining light to the marketplace, right? I mean, he's got it figured out. And the problem I think the similar problem we have with the great game of business is, well, if this is so damn good, how come more people aren't doing it? And I think if anybody would understand that he kind of accentuates this in terms of the book that he's written, and I want to tell him is that I bought 20 books and I sent them to all the college presidents in Springfield, Missouri. I sent it to the mayor. I sent it to the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce, and it was for a Christmas run. I said, "Hey, I know this guy. This is really good stuff. Maybe you guys ought to read it as part of, what you learn from hanging around a guy like Martin is that when he does something, you want to be part of it, and you want to be able to, bring other people in terms of what the ultimate outcome of what he's trying to do. And then what he's trying to do is build better communities. Okay, he's trying to create successful people, and I mean, it's of the noblest cause, and that's my total reflection of knowing this guy from start to finish. And he's been the same all the way through, right from the very beginning to where he is today. So it's been a hell of a ride. I wish I had the opportunity to see more of him, but this is a great time to get back together.
It is a great time to get back together. And believe me, without a doubt, a stop in Springfield is on my horizon as soon as we get this COVID thing behind us. But let me suggest that when it comes to the great game of business, the opportunity that I see for the great game that is yet to be realized is in what I call in the book, the newer economy, all right, or the innovation economy, because there are a lot of jobs being created specifically in the newer industries. And that's also where the next generation, there's a lot of next generation talent that want to work in these newer industries. And your millennials have an evolving set of values and interests that quite honestly map very well to the great game of business. And yet most of them have never heard of it. And so what I would like to do, if it's all right with you guys, is try to concentrate on this challenge of how could we get more exposure for the great game in these newer industries and in these areas that are right now not really visible so much in practitioners of the game. And that's not to say that other businesses don't matter, because they do, but my understanding as both a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, how that unfolded and kind of the challenges of working in the newer industries, and also being an investor today, where I go out and I help others start and grow companies and get investors behind them. That could be the unique thing that I could offer the great game, and hopefully be useful for you to attract others that are starting and growing companies in these newer industries, so they too could become practitioners. Right?
Sounds great. So let's jump in. Do you want to unpack a little bit about your history and how you ended up where you are today?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with a little entrepreneurial story in terms of background to suggest that after college, I began as a human resources major in college. My first job and only time that I worked for anyone other than when I started TriNet was really working for the government. I used to work for Navy Exchanges, which operates the post exchanges or retail stores for the Navy. And it was a fabulous opportunity. I never do anything different. I'm the luckiest guy in the world because I got moved around to a bunch of places, East Coast, West Coast, Japan, Southern Italy. I mean, really diverse places that forced me to learn how to put myself in other people's shoes that thought very differently than I did. And then landed in the San Francisco Bay Area in the mid 80s. And as soon as I got on the ground, I tried to look around for a job to get in the corporate world, get out of government and be in the corporate world. But nobody valued my experience. And they, in fact, said I was good for government use only. And as you know from experience and speaking with a lot of entrepreneurs over the years, oftentimes it's the people that feel that they're unemployable end up becoming entrepreneurs. So as I spent time looking around at what was the right path for me to start a company, since no one was valuing my skills, and I didn't know much about business models back then, but somehow figured out being a consultant and working on the billable hour was not really a good business model. I was fortunate to have stumbled across what was then the emergence. There were only maybe a half dozen companies or so that were doing what today we call being a professional employer organization. So we're a professional employer in that it's a kind of a business that you aggregate all these small companies into one group and share the relationship of being an employer. And by doing that, generating economies of scale. What's not to like about that? Removing headaches of being an employer from a small business. And so it sounds great, but the problem is, as all entrepreneurs who are trying to do something new and in a business that people aren't familiar with, there's a big chicken and egg scenario of, hey, you're trying to sell something based on economies of scale, but when you begin, you got zero scale. So this was a really big struggle. And this all happened before I met Jack, all right? So we start the company. We're a resounding failure. We're about to go out of business after about 18 months because we used every single dollar we could beg or borrow from friends, destroyed the credit limits, blew through my 401k saving, everything. And the only way we got out of it was coming up with a plan to sell some shares of TriNet to private investors. Now we had to have a plan because we were a failure at that point. And our plan was we were going to become focused on a vertical market, a narrow vertical market. And we're going to sell TriNet services only to emerging growth technology companies. And that was, I won't say lucky because there was a lot of thought, but that was the saving grace for the company. Because with that move, not only
was it an international investor?
At this point in time, it was before we had a relationship with an international investor that I'll get to. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So this was just small angel investors. We raised a total of $50,000 in that first investment. And with that investment, that was the difference between going out of business and my being here to share the story with you today. All right. And so we then went full bore down our chosen vertical market. It was the right vertical market. This is starting 1990. And I had a passionate conviction to make sure I'd be paying my investors back. All right. Because now it's not just about me, but we have people that took a big bet on me and Krista, my co-founder, my wife. All right. And we said, we got to get the investors paid. We got to grow. We got to get out of this funk that we're in. And the beauty that came out of it was it brought me into the world of Silicon Valley. Because up to that point, we were just selling to general small businesses. And general small businesses did not want to buy TriNet services because they never heard of it. It was too hard to understand. It was an innovation. Small businesses don't embrace innovation, all right? So, but in Silicon Valley, our value proposition mapped to what these startup companies needed, which is why we selected it as our vertical. And more importantly, they were open to embracing something that was new and innovative. And that brought me into this world of innovation economy. I was a startup. I thought I was starting a small business, but really I was doing a startup. By the way, slight interlude here. There's a difference between being a startup and a small business. They both might have just a small number of employees, all right? But a startup is specifically growing with an idea of having a national or global audience, and also is really being based on an innovation that the market has not yet embraced. So I fit that definition of being a startup back when we started in 1988. But it took me getting into Silicon Valley before I began to appreciate it. So lo and behold, we get through that hurdle, we start ramping up. Come 1994, company is growing. I met Jack in 1994. And you remember where that was, Jack, at MIT?
Yeah. Birthing of giants.
Yeah, birthing of giants.
Right.
Do you talk about the birthing of giants with other people at all?
I was there for 18 straight years.
Yeah.
There was 40 to 60 CEOs there every single year.
Yes.
And it was a great experience because the times changed in the business cycle. And I think the dot-com was hot, and everybody that was sitting in that audience was more concerned with flipping companies than enduring companies. Remember that?
Yes.
It was crazy.
So I'm there in 1994 meeting Jack. So that's just ahead of the dot-com. Dot-com comes in 95, all right?
Yeah,
but it's
right.
on the horizon. And so I hear Jack's message, and it completely aligned with our goals for the company, because I'm a fervent believer in transparency and also alignment of values with the team, because I'm a believer, especially with my HR background, on how important it is to have people share a common set of values if you're going to be successful and you're going to fight your way out of, really tough challenges, as SRC had to do in the early days. And so the message resonated. And then I started getting more of my team members on board with that. And then we began that journey of learning the great game of business and deploying it. And so then in 95, we got to a stage where we really were growing successfully. The dot-com happens, and there was this huge amount of growth opportunity. We had all these friends on Sand Hill Road, which is ground zero for venture capital in the world. And we could get in to talk to the VCs, which was hard to do even in those days. And they said, Martin, we love TriNet, but we can't invest in you because you're a service business. And they passed. So we had all this great opportunity to put capital to work to scale up. We could see this market coming right at us, and nobody would give us capital. And that, Jack, is how we ended up going overseas. We ended up getting an investor from the UK. And the important thing about that investor, which was a public company investor, a public staffing company, was that they believed in the long-term commitment to a vertical market, which was us. And as a public company, they were all about being predictable and transparent. So we were with that investor. We sold them a controlling stake in the company, which they paid a high premium for on a basis of what we call per worksite employee basis. It was the highest premium ever paid for a PEO at that point in time. We did it because they gave us a good slug of capital. It was about $4 million in capital for this tiny company. And that capital really allowed us to scale the business. And it was with a partner that we were very well aligned with. And we then went to work on public market discipline. And that was the second half of the 90s, and in which we rode the dot-com wave. All right. So that's an important piece.
So talk about that, Martin, because the public market discipline is something that I don't think a lot of people think about or are even aware of, but like I read about you in Bo Burlingham's book, Finish Big, and you talk about, how you learned about it and how it was a tough lesson, but ended up being one of the most valuable. Can you define it and talk about it a little bit?
So the thing about being a public company, as trying it is today, is that public company investors show no mercy. And the chairman from our institutional shareholder, the corporate from the UK, his favorite saying was, "You're only as good as your last quarter." All right, because if you set expectations, and if you fail to meet the expectations, you will be pummeled. All right, that's public market discipline. So if you're a private company and you can be predictable, and you can be specifically consistently predictable, this is how the best public companies get valued. It's being both predictable and being long-term consistently predictable. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, of course, you have to have transparency and all that. And so you can't get involved with things like related party transactions. You have to have real audits and real solid accounting. And you have to have an engaged team. You have to have a lot of the features of being a public company. And here we were, a small private company, putting those things in place while we're a private company. And yes, we rolled our numbers up to a public company, but they gave us a lot of latitude and support and helped instill in us the importance of being accountable. So when sure enough, we hit our speed bump, and we went to our investors because our $4 million deal was in tranches, and we missed a target, a key revenue target, because we had a bunch of customer concentration risks that left at the same time. Suddenly we missed our numbers, and we thought, hey, we got all this demand right in front of us. Surely you, the investor, will advance us this next tranche. And it's like, no, that ain't gonna happen. That's called accountability, right? All right. Lucky that I kept my job, all right? Because remember, I'm a minority shareholder now, all right? But this is public market discipline. And yes, we learned a lot by going through that. And then we advance to the stage at the end of the 90s, where we have 99% of our revenue coming from .com customers. And for anyone in this audience that understands what it was like at the height of the .com, the actual high point was in March 2000. We filed it for trying to go public on March 2nd, 2000. NASDAQ was at its peak, all right? And here we have 99% of our revenue coming from .com customers. We're selling the pickaxes and blue jeans to the gold miners. Everybody loves that story, all right? And then the air starts coming out of the bubble. And then we got dragged through an SEC process, which is another whole story, all right? Because we went out on the roadshow, but not until October of 2000. So in October of 2000, the world was a completely different place. And by the way, you never go out on the roadshow to go public unless you're absolutely sure you can get the deal done. Because the work involved to do that, the distraction, the drain on the team, the setting the expectations, everybody's getting out their calculator and looking at how much money they're going to make when the company goes public, especially when everybody in the company has options and the incentives are spread all over the place. Think of the dynamics inside a company like that, all right? We get to the end of the roadshow and we don't price. We abort the offering. We felt the pricing could not make sense and we aborted the offering. So I'm one of the very few people you'll ever meet that have been through the IPO process twice with the same company, all right? But aborting the IPO, which then led to the .bomb era, if you know your history, starting 2000 and running through 2002, we were then retrenching at a speed that was even greater than we had grown the previous 3 years. Think about that on the impact of the team. And when I look back and say, how the heck did we ever survive? The answer really was the great game of business. And I mean that sincerely. Our commitment to have been playing the game through that entire cycle. Boom, and believe me, during the boom period, we had lots of challenges. It wasn't so much it was hard to find business. If you were in sales at Trinet and .com, you loved it, right? It was a bonanza. If you were in operations and customer facing, it was a disaster because the demand far exceeded our capability to deliver. So we had all the pressures of hyper growth, still trying to change the wheels on the bus while we're flying down the highway during the .com era, and then suddenly retrenching and laying people off to try to keep the ship afloat. Because, you know, if you look at the map of the NASDAQ 2000 to 2002 and put it on a map, I actually have a slide on it I can show you comparing it to the 1929 Dow. The trend is exactly the same. It's eerily similar. It was like the Great Depression. If you were in the tech industry, as we were, that's how bad it was.
So can you give us an example of how the great game of business helped you through that process? Because I know you were transparent and communicative to your people, but you know, a lot of folks ask us, well, what if you share the bad news? What will people do?
You know, the transparency and sharing the bad news is critical, because if you think of the people in the company who have the most talent, they're the ones that, as the ship starts to sink, they're the ones that can most easily jump off. If they have talent that is in demand and they can see the company is going south, and even though we had a strong product, the market is falling apart all around us. So the best people, the best salespeople, the best technical staff, the best customer service people who had the skills most in demand were the ones that could most easily leave. So how do you keep, the reason we survived is that we kept the best talent because we were transparent, not because we kept the cards close to the vest, but because we were transparent about exactly where we were at every step of the way. And we invested throughout the boom process and going down. We were always investing in financial literacy. That journey of increasing financial literacy never let up, which is critical. You know, people are not brought as new hires into a company knowing how to read a P&L or balance sheet, much less understanding both of them and how they fit together. So we always went out of our way to work on financial literacy every meeting we had, and we had our own meeting rhythm and how we did that, how we reported out numbers, how we educated new talent, how we reinforced that message. But that's a key piece of the game. It's like the journey of education and bringing up financial literacy is an ongoing journey.
Could you say, Martin, that that's where a lot of your sanity lied during that particular point in time? Is you had that routine that, see, the market discipline, when I hear that, I think about the ownership discipline, okay? And this whole idea of if someone's betting on you, you got to cover the bets, and your wide concern about paying it back. And, you know, granted, yes, there are market disciplines, but they're really ownership disciplines that you hope to share with everybody else so they understand what disciplines really mean, you know? I mean, isn't it discipline of command and control? I mean, it's a discipline of engagement. And did you find it interesting that in your pursuit of financial literacy, just how interested people really, really got?
Absolutely. I mean, I wasn't surprised because we built it into the culture.
Yeah.
But it was very clear people were paying attention.
Yeah.
All right.
Right.
And it really helped that we had a strong board. We've always had a strong board. So as a CEO, I put a lot of emphasis on composition of the board, how I interacted with the board, and building support with the board for the things that we were doing, including transparency. So yes, there was an absolute interest in wanting to know what was going on, because as you speak about within the Great Game, if you don't communicate what's really going on, people just take their best educated guess, and it's usually the wrong guess, and it's usually worse than the reality of the situation. So keeping people informed during the down period and exactly where we were, and as we had a lot of hard decisions to make, we basically cut the company workforce in half over a period of a year, all right? And as an entrepreneur, entrepreneurs struggle mightily, myself included, with laying anyone off. Because I always felt it was my neck on the line when I asked them to join me, and I'm the one that screwed up when I then had to say, you have to leave, all right?
It should be their decision to leave, not your actions that they caused them to. I've felt that paradox, that pressure.
I would
just to
not
rewind for a second, I think what was interesting was the disciplines that you're talking about are the deliverables that you get when you engage everybody in terms of knowing what's going on and then ask their contributions. So what that ultimately reflects is the stronger you're building your literacy base, the more accurate your forecasts were, and it fit in with your whole idea of transparency. Okay, there's a real deep need to do that in order to be able to be right. You cannot be right by yourself. It's
right.
Maybe you can in some cases, okay, but in order to be able to hit that quarter to quarter mentality, okay, or whatever the long-term value proposition is, you need a steady stream of team members, okay, that are all aligned in terms of their thinking, that will set the standards for themselves and then execute on those standards. And there's nothing stronger than that.
Yeah. But here's another side to that we haven't touched on, and that is the importance of saying it's not about just a top-down forecast that everybody buys into.
Oh, yeah, right.
The Great Game is about how do you get it from the bottom up.
Yeah, right.
You've got a predictable unit rolling up with predictability to a department, rolling up predictability to the next level so that we consolidate everything, and you have buy-in at each segment of the company's hierarchy. So it's not a top-down forecast, it's a forecast that's organic, moved upwards, and yes, there has to be some balance. The board says you got to be here, and then you go back to the team and talk about, well, how are we going to get there, and put those pieces together. That can't just be done by the CFO. It can't be done by the CEO and CFO huddling in a room and figuring that all out. No, it's about having a widespread amount of engagement, which is the fundamental premise behind, I see, the Great Game of business.
Yeah, it's all about obviously getting to the common good by letting the common good participate in the ultimate decision-making process of the company, But that comes with education, right? I mean, that really comes with, you just can't go out there and expect it to come in as a MBA or as a new hire. I mean, it'd be great if we had worker-ready people like that. So I guess what I watch your involvement is that you've come to the conclusion it's business that's got to be the teachers, right?
Yes.
And that's kind of the message that we really want to. I mean, it's not the fact that we want to scuff at education. I mean, if they wanted to come to the party, that would be really good, okay? But business leaders, business people have to take up this call to arms, and they have to realize that they have a mechanism to be able to teach people how to be that successful. So you run a company like that, and now you're later on in your career, you're trying to run a community like that. Your community just gets bigger and bigger, doesn't it?
Yes. And even for the people in that era where we laid people off, I'm personally in touch with a lot of those people that left the company during that era and still feel their time working at TriNet was the most important part of their career in terms of the foundation that they learned there. They then brought elsewhere, all right? And it's still a defining piece of individual career path.
And that just puts fuel in your tank, right? I mean, isn't that saying that what you're teaching and what you're advocating is passed on not only to families, okay, that learn from this, but also to future job opportunities? And how many people have you had that said, I'm working at a company right now and I don't have the tools that I had to try that? I mean, how many times have you heard that, how do they expect me to do this job, but they don't give me the information to be able to get it done? I mean, you're trying to break an industrial society mentality that's been here for 100 years.
Yes. And this is also why I feel in the opportunity set that is before the great game, the innovation economy represents a real path to grow exposure of the game with an audience that's hungry for it, including the millennials, who really value that transparency and value being engaged instead of being told you have to wait your turn till you're in management and are at the top of the pyramid before you get access to that kind of stuff. You know, today's millennials, they want to be engaged in a way, no matter what their role is. They want to know what's going on. They want to be part of it. Even if they don't have an official manager title, they want to contribute.
Well, they were taught certain values, and you raised your family, I've raised my family, and I think the education system is basically changed since I went to school, whereas now there's so much involvement in the community and so many courses of action that they have to take while they're going through school. So they come out ready to make a difference, but there isn't a place for them to be able to make the difference. What you do is the minute they get on board, they're making a difference right from the very start. And that is what's also cool about a situation of this nature, that this kind of a system blends into all changes in the economy, all changes in the marketplace, and is prepared for whatever comes along, even a pandemic.
Yes, without a doubt. So when we got to a stage where I could see the company is growing well, and I'm actually looking forward to the transition out of an operating role, and made a decision to move my family from Silicon Valley, where we started the company, to my hometown in Little Falls, New York, in the very middle of New York State. That was way back. Still amazing to me. You know, we went ahead and kind of made that move in 1999 before we went public, thinking that, hey, I was going to transition after we take the company public. I'll transition out as CEO then. And because of the dot bomb, that didn't happen. I ended up commuting cross country instead of for a couple of years as the original plan. I ended up commuting for 10 years, essentially. All that time on planes and the contrast between my two valleys, the Mohawk Valley, which is where my home in Little Falls is, and Silicon Valley, the contrast between those two valleys was so stark. And I kept thinking, well, someday I'm going to stop this commute. And, you know, what do I want to do in terms of the next chapter? It wasn't to start another company, because I've been really blessed. I don't really have a need to start another company, certainly not financially. And I think my calling is to really help others start companies. So how can I best do that? And that contrast between how things work in a place that is an entrepreneur supporting community like Silicon Valley, little did I know when I started TriNet, it's the most entrepreneur supporting place on the planet. I didn't know that when I started. But now when I'm back in my hometown and I can see such a difference, you know, upstate New York is like the Midwest, really. It would not be that different from Springfield, okay? But we have some advantages, including over the Midwest, where in upstate New York, we've got 100+ colleges and universities that collectively enroll more than 500,000 college students, big number, largest concentration of STEM programs as a region of any place in the country. More than $3.5 billion a year in corporate and academic research. That's a big deal. Close proximity to the capital markets and institutional and personal relationships with Wall Street, all right? Big deal. You have all these assets, great infrastructure. And yet on the metric of venture capital investment, and remember venture capital, professional investors going into the highest growth opportunity private companies, on that metric, of the 18 regions in the United States tracked for venture capital, when I began this journey in 2010, upstate New York was ranked dead last, number 18 of 18. Wow. So as I'm, spending this time going back and forth, I'm thinking, what's wrong with this picture? Here we got all these assets, and we are dead last. All right, there's something wrong with that picture. And that's what put me on this journey to say, all right, I'm only one guy. How can I change the direction of an entire regional economy? And so we began this journey of saying, how does one create not just a single entrepreneurial community, but because we're spread out in upstate New York over 7 distinct metro areas, how can we create a community of entrepreneurial communities? And that journey began with the starting of the Upstate Venture Connect nonprofit in 2010.
So as we look at this, what for our audience, what is your involvement at this point in 2010 with TriNet and your not-for-profit push that you're trying to kind of
so I stepped down as CEO in 2008, served as chairman until 2010, and in 2010 started, and I remain on TriNet's board of directors today. And then in 2010, with the starting of the nonprofit Upstate Venture Connect, it started this journey. It's now in the 11th year to help other communities start and grow companies, embracing principles of what it is to be a supportive community for entrepreneurs, especially creating jobs in the newer industries. Because among other things, I was aware that when you fit that definition of a startup that I described, or any company that is selling its product or service to a national or global audience, and then the second condition is to be based on an innovation not yet embraced in the marketplace, not broadly embraced. For every one job created with a company that fits that description, 5 jobs are created in the local community. That research was borne out by economist Enrico Moretti, who's out of Berkeley, and the book is called New Geography of Jobs, something I would highly recommend for those that are interested. And so by creating more innovation economy jobs in a local community, you can accelerate overall job growth and, importantly, wage growth in communities. So the focus of Upstate Venture Connect would then be, how are we going to increase the number of companies in the innovation economy, not relying on government subsidies to attract big corporations to come in, which is the typical move, in which the data proves out is very unsuccessful and is a waste of taxpayer money, but instead grow those companies organically. And that's the mission that we've been on and will continue to be on.
So 10 years of this, I'm curious about, how was it first received by not only entrepreneurs and the communities themselves, but also, who are we trying to influence here? A whole state of a combination of business people, politicians, constituents. I mean, what did they think then? And then what's been the progress in the last 10 years?
Okay, so I got lots of arrows on my back. I could tell you a lot of things that didn't work. One of the important things that didn't work that is probably worth sharing is that when I began, because I could get access just about anywhere, like I could get to college presidents, I could get to mayors, I could get to high-level politicians, elected assemblymen and state senators, et cetera, even the governor. And so I had access, business corporate people. I could get indoors and I could be talking to these people and convince them, hey, we got to work towards collaboration, because I knew back then the issue was everybody's kind of doing their own thing and all these efforts are siloed and there's no collaboration institutionally across some boundaries that need to be crossed. And things are also siloed by geography. Like what one metro area does is so completely cut off from what another metro area does, where they could be close enough to collaborate, but they don't. So those were problems I knew, and I thought, all right, I'm going to really help lobby from the top down. Didn't work. It took about 2.5 years, then concluded that strategy is not working. All right. So what do? We instead focused on, let's prowl around within the innovation economy, where the places that people are hanging out, and let's see who's actually doing something. And let's concentrate our efforts of building our network with those people who are the doers. Because by concentrating on the doers rather than just the people that are at the highest levels, then we'll grow it from the bottom up organically. And that's the path that has proven to have a lot more impact. And in the book, we talk about how to do that, including the different paths of trying to scale up what we call creative collisions, getting the right people to bump into each other by our helping to orchestrate getting the right people in the room, and also by scaling up the volume and quality of referral by trusted source. These are the two ways that new relationships get going. And then can we, through Upstate Venture Connect, build through platform and process and extending a connected network, can we scale up the volume and quality of both creative collisions and referral by trusted source? That's the formula. And as an example of that, even investors, because when it comes to angel investors, which are the people that take the greatest risk going into early stage companies, there are a lot of reasons that people who have capital and are really interested in trying to help their community, there are a lot of reasons they sit on the sidelines and listen to their financial advisors tell them, investing in a startup company is the stupidest thing you could do with your money, all right? And so there's a lot of headwinds that are going on that get in the way of people that want to help don't get involved in actually helping. So, we spent a lot of energy around how do you solve that problem and getting people to actually work together and crossing these boundaries in ways that are very common, like in Silicon Valley, these things are already figured out. So, and I'm no magician, and I'm not the smartest guy around, I'm not. But when I find something that's the best practice, like the great game of business, I'm in the case philosophy, copy and steal everything. If it's an idea, you guys come up with the program and the process, I'd be crazy not to copy and steal it, all right? So I just try to take that which works in these proven areas that are growing lots of jobs in the new economy and say, well, how can we repurpose it to work in an area that's not growing new economy jobs and are waving goodbye to their next generation talent who are then leaving for places like Silicon Valley, New York City, Boston, Austin, Boulder, Colorado, et cetera, because that's where the jobs are in the newer industries.
I keep having this instinct that it's not only about making the private equity or capital available. It's the fact that you have a secret sauce, and that goes back to the disciplines that the startup has to put into effect in order to be able to survive. And I think what you're doing, which is so critical, is really, really teaching them how to be successful and then forcing them, by your repetitive nature of doing things right, to then never, the worst thing that you can have a startup is miss your forecast. Worst thing that you can in terms of when you're out there trying to tap capital is to consistently go to your boards and say, I missed my number again, And that is probably one of the most crucial steps that a startup doesn't even recognize. And the other is just how much equity should I give away or how much should I borrow? And I got to believe that, especially reading your book, is that the whole idea of a sound startup education, all right, is what's creating the success factor, and the success factor breeds more success. Now, how do you get that into the anti-movement, which is the government, that puts the innovation centers together, tells everybody they can be entrepreneurs, puts 1,400 entrepreneurial programs in the United States, really more to make money for the universities and the education system than to really figure out how to make this thing as successful as we possibly can. I mean, you're a guy in your own lane and you're staying in your lane and you're thinking that, the highway's going to output it here eventually. The only reason I can say this is because I'm hitting my head up against the same thing you're talking about.
Yeah. Of course, I do have a political side too, in that, yeah, I think you may be aware, I did run for Congress as an independent candidate back in 2016. And one of the reasons I did that was to really learn more about the political process. And it was an education that was so worthwhile, all right? I learned a ton, but it was also the launch pad for an effort in creating a minor party, not a minor party that's ever going to be a national minor party, but remember, the states are a laboratory for change that someday can spill upwards. And believe it or not, I am more optimistic now that the right things are happening to create an awareness of how states can lead change at the national level. I'm more optimistic about that now than I've ever been before. And so our tiny upstate jobs party is now really putting more energy to capitalize on some of the movements that are probably outside of your view right now. But yes, there is a political side that is one of my activities to further exactly what you're talking about, Jack.
We don't see a political side that doesn't want to do it. Okay.
Right.
We see political sides that just don't do it. I mean,
Right.
they tell you they want to do it, and they say, well, let's go collaborate and bring this to a head. And then 4 years later, it's gone, and we have a new director of economic development, or we have a whole new budget in terms of how they're going to subsidize programs to create more jobs, and we never get to it. So maybe you could help the audience here. I love this accelerated process that you're going through, and you're the most optimistic person, okay, when it comes down to getting the impossible done. All right. So I'd like to feed off you. Okay. I'd like to know, what can I do here? Okay. To get more of our community. And listen, we really do have a good community. Okay. And I think because of our consistency and our age, the community's been really, really good to us. And the community really gets the whole idea of financial literacy. We see it in our utility companies, and we see it in the governments and everything of this nature. So I think this idea of you got to start with yourself and then grow outward is really, really true. Okay. But, how do you do it? How are you doing it on that large of a scale? Okay.
I did touch on this earlier about recognizing going to the leaders and working down was not a winning strategy.
Right.
And the difference for us was deciding who are the people who are actually doing it, and how can we cultivate relationships with them and support them so that they can increase the impact they're having and spread our network among the doers. That's really a key page out of our playbook, which I do talk about in the book.
So how do you get to these people that are really doing what you're doing? And there's a lot of them out there, and who have made that decision to sit there and go, I don't want a cabinet post in Washington, D.C. I don't want to run for politics. I just want to stay in my lane with the idea that if our value proposition is a true value proposition, it has to start with ourselves and grow inward, outward, than trying to go out there and take a cabinet post and try to change the whole philosophical view of a market.
People want to join a tribe. And when your description of the tribe and how they fit in aligns with their interests and their heart, they will step forward. And then
They're quiet though.
When you get them to step in, it's also a matter of having the resources and the path to support their growth and engagement. So, it doesn't happen with just a single meeting. As you think about any of the relationships that become meaningful for you, it's because the relationship is nurtured and you're giving more than you're asking for. This is how relationships get built and how impact grows when the right group of leaders commit to a longer term plan. That's another important element. The political process is fraught with people that can only think in 1 or 2 year cycles.
Yeah, right.
And, this is not a 1 or 2 year cycle kind of deal. I've been at this 11 years.
We don't learn from cycle to cycle either. We don't understand that the importance of a 10-year plan is that once you go through your 10-year plan, what you've learned from that 10-year plan to set even a better 10-year plan. We can't, that's the foundation that we're trying to get rooted, right? This just to start.
Yes, you want to grow your tribe. That's what you want to be thinking about. Grow your tribe, looking for the right leaders who can also have magnetic pull to bring out of their networks more people to expand your tribe membership. And this applies to any cause that someone is trying to grow.
So why are we so quiet?
What do you mean? You got a lot to be proud of.
I know. I think a lot of people are in business are afraid to stick their necks out because of repercussions. I think that there's such a national mood on businesses and business people, and they think it's much safer for them to be able to just worry about what they're doing right in front of them instead of expanding and creating that kind of warmth and collaboration that you're looking for.
But you're not going to find success with every business leader that you come across. But there are people out there that share your values. And can you make it easy and inviting for them to be part of your tribe? That's leadership. That's my view. My friend Brad Feld wrote this book, The Startup Community Way. All right. And this is another really good resource. This is on top of his book called Startup Community, where he does a fantastic in helping to explain how things look from the perspective of those that are holding office and holding some of the posts that you've mentioned, Jack, that get in the way of progress on long-term goals and what some of the systemic issues are behind it. So I'd also point that out. Probably it would be a separate discussion. He'd be somebody worth inviting to join the Great Game discussion at some point in the future. Great.
Well, I'll tell you what, anybody that can add to sending the message of the importance of long-term goals, okay, is a valuable commodity, okay, because Rich and Steve can tell you how many people will sit there and go, plan? Are you crazy? I don't have enough time to plan. All right. Oh, I don't want to attend this session because high involvement planning. I mean, you're crazy. Who gets involved in planning nowadays? And you want to just hit your forehead saying, don't you understand that the only way you're going to get to what it is you want to get to is by planning? I think that's an interesting discussion. I think it's a good point. Okay. I mean, I don't know how many plans our community have had here, strategic plans, okay, that never was executed. It's almost as if planning is in opposition now, which scares me more than anything.
Well, especially things that involve collaboration across multiple entities. That's the vulnerability. All right. Yeah. But to the extent your tribe puts some things together that you can help manage collaboration towards some longer term goals, especially ones that don't require public money, because anything involving public money comes with strings. You might have a whole bunch of people in your community that share in the vision and be willing to support it with private money. All right, because you do have to have some infrastructure to keep communications alive and to get the word out, all right, and to get people together. So, there is a place for there to be some resources devoted towards steady progress of a long-term goal.
No, I totally agree with you. We have just completed a video on all of our properties and what they'll look like in 10 years. And with those drones and everything you got right now, I mean, when you look at the imprint that we're going to have between now and 10 years from now, with over 3.5 million square feet, and half of it has to be developed, and then we're going to be presenting it to the community. And how many people in business have really said, hey, this is where we're headed in 10 years. And in the hopes that, maybe when they do their next strategic plan or their economic development, they would ask you what you're doing. Okay. So you could develop the connection. I mean, if you're going to develop an economic plan, wouldn't it be a good idea to talk about the people that are in the business cycle that have the equity or have the capital, and ask their participation in terms of where you're going. And maybe we can kind of work together instead of lobbing hand grenades at each other, right?
For sure.
So we're going to try to put it in a pictorial form, and then not only and leverage it exactly the same way you do. I mean, when we see people that are now going to see us putting up retail centers or manufacturing facilities, you know, we know they'll be sitting there saying, how do I become a part of this? Okay. That whole idea of we're going to try to visualize a 10-year plan now.
And again, that's for the community, your immediate community around you. But I'm still a believer that the appeal of the great game has tremendous opportunity for that broader scope of what I mentioned as innovation economy companies, including in places like Silicon Valley, New York City, Boston, et cetera, where you have teams coming together who are being held accountable. Because I'll tell you this, when you are a venture capital backed company and they end up having a board of directors that are primarily seated with people that are financial people, occasionally you'll have some entrepreneurs on there, but you do have some financial discipline as they move up the capital stack. And oftentimes you have entrepreneurs, as I was, first-time entrepreneur, without that grounding in these things, all right? Without really understanding enough about the financial literacy and the importance of driving that through the workforce, these leaders in these earlier stage companies want to engage their team. Their livelihood as the CEO is dependent on their having an engaged and literate team. They need the easy glide path for them to see the relevancy and the how-to. And yes, they have a short attention span, because you have that across, you know, many of the people that come exposed to the game. They hear the, you know, the high level dream and the, you know, these great stories, but, you know, what's the distance between this description of the promised land and the reality of where that business is today? And that gap seems to be so large that they can't figure out how to close that gap in any reasonable time frame, because it's too amorphous. It's too hard for them to see. That is what I would argue is the challenge for your great game team. And the more time you would be, you know, you get exposure to the types of companies that I'm suggesting, you may have flavors of the great game that could address companies in that particular situation. Because when you get to the point of having the type of messaging that is understood by that target audience as being relevant, you will have a path beaten to your door.
Okay, we're screaming the same message. Okay, we're screaming like crazy. All right, but you know, how come the millennials aren't ready for this when they get into the marketplace? Okay, I mean, how come they don't come worker ready when everything that you're saying is the ideal? Okay, that it should be the goal. And we keep swimming upstream. Listen, I participate in all the innovation programs here, the entrepreneurship programs here, and I want to pull my hair out because they're not getting this message, okay? So how do we package this message, right? How do we make that change?
Well, again,
I can build the biggest tribe in the world, okay? But if I can't stop this education system to be looking at one way, one thing, I mean, it's like David and Goliath.
You can't boil the ocean, Jack. All right. So
I want to.
pick your battles. All right.
Hey, wasn't
your battles.
Don't you have a statement on fish?
Yeah. Well, the fact is, I care a lot about education. All right. And I do have a whole separate initiative on education. There is a chapter in the book on that. All right. And I'm very involved with my local community in accelerating change in education, but I choose to do that as just an adjunct to other things that I do, all right? And where possible, to leverage relationships that are already in my network with my main areas of focus. So yeah, I agree that if you wanted to put financial literacy into the education system and have that be a focus of the great game, there's a tremendous upside there. But that's a whole different ball game than helping the companies. And as you mentioned earlier, the companies have greater incentive and greater ability to bring about change than the bureaucratic education system with political influences and unions and all these other things that get in the way of doing what needs to be done. Businesses can move faster, all right? And when they can see that line of sight from where they are to how this will have an impact in having a more successful company, the right leadership can make that movement very fast, much faster than an educational institution would be my observation.
Is it your mission statement in Educators Across Borders where don't give them a fish, teach them how to fish? Is that one of the mission statements of the?
Well, Entrepreneurs Across Borders is another nonprofit. I have 4 nonprofits and
Right.
4 companies, all right?
Right.
And Entrepreneurs Across Borders tries to take the lessons we've learned in the 11 years of Upstate Venture Connect, working in upstate New York, and repurposing it for helping entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs in underdeveloped countries.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So Jamaica is our pilot. It's a lot of fun, by the way. I welcome anyone in this audience that's interested in plugging in and think of the impact that you can have in helping entrepreneurs who are really hungry and just don't have the opportunity to get mentoring and help from real seasoned entrepreneurs. All right. And they have their own structural issues and barriers and things culturally and politically. It's a very different ballgame than the US. So that's another long-term plan, but we'll have to bookmark that for a future discussion. Ask me in 10 years and we'll see how far along we are.
Well, I did want to put in a plug for that not-for-profit, okay? But I also think that whole thing is applicable to what you're doing.
Yes.
Right where you're at. I mean, all you're doing is expanding upon it.
Yeah. Well,
But
and
it
part of
seems
that
like
is,
they're more interested, though. I mean, the experiences that I've had, and I remember Tom Peters telling me this a long time ago when he wrote his book, Pursuit of Excellence. He said, Jack, I just got back from China. He said, in my speech, he said, there were 6,000 millennials in that audience. He said,
wow.
when I give speeches in the United States, I never see a millennial. I'll never forget that. So I guess the idea is how do we get the millennials in the stadium, right?
Yep.
The path from my perspective is through the leaders of those companies.
To be teachers?
Well, if you get the leader of these companies to buy in, then you will seed an audience because the people in that company will eventually go to other companies.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it really means getting leaders involved because there's definitely people out there that have been through the TriNet experience, and it's certainly during my tenure anyway, would even recognize it as the great game of business. They would hear the words and they know what the great game of business means. All right. And
So you're saying we're not working hard enough?
Well, you're not working in the direction with a focus on innovation economy companies. That's what I'm suggesting is an opportunity, but it means having a concentrated focus and saying, how do we reach them? How do we nurture them? What's the right way to give them the quickest path to reflect also that it's a different business than a manufacturing plant or a retail store or a different type of service business. There are different issues.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm faced with this thing all the time from industries that said, well, it won't work in my company, and we're trying to take one hurdle at a time saying, don't we all have the same report card? I mean, don't we all at the end of the day have an income statement, a balance sheet, and a cash flow statement? All right. Isn't this a measurement by which we are all judged by? And if in fact we are, then why don't we gauge everybody in terms of pursuing the same results? It seems to be so comic book simple, but so difficult to be able to spread.
I think what Martin it's kind of interesting, Martin, of, the type of leader you're describing, because I think that's been a barrier for Great Game over the years, is that you've had leaders that just didn't think that way. They didn't embrace transparency or, value the opportunity to involve everybody in the organization. But what I hear you saying is that there's a new leadership out there in this innovation economy that would embrace it if it's presented to them and they were aware of it.
And they could see how applicable it was for their organization and a path to plug in.
Right.
Because the difficulty is they would buy the vision, but see a big disconnect from where they currently are. And the steps to get from where they are to that dreamland is just too hard for them to figure out. That's the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
But see, here's another thing I'll maybe close with, because I realize we'll probably run it over your scheduled time, but you can edit out all the stuff that it makes no sense.
A lot of good stuff.
In the innovation economy, where especially you have companies that are being backed by equity capital and are growing rapidly as a result, the only companies that survive are those that are highly adaptive. All right? Because remember, the faster you grow, sometimes capital can, if you get a big influx of capital in a reflection of there's a lot of growth opportunity from a marketplace demand, you still have plenty of examples of companies that swallowed a lot of capital and then went belly up. All right. And why did they go belly up? Because they didn't adapt. Okay. They didn't adapt. Sometimes it's to changes in the external environment. The market shifts. Another technology came out that was better. Government regulation, competition. There's the external environment can shift in any of those things. But leadership, good leadership, learns to adapt even with changes in the environment. And the best leadership is able to create that culture of adaptability top to bottom. So it's not just the CEO that's adaptive, but creating a culture of adaptivity. Mm-hmm. And I would argue that the great game of business, this is part of the philosophy. You don't get people at every level of a business being highly adaptive unless they bought into it. They know the rules of the game. You're keeping score so they know where they stand, and they've got a stake in the outcome. I mean, these are the foundational principles of the great game. And if you're a leader in these companies, which are under lots of pressure to be adaptive, it's making it easy for them to understand if you want your company to survive, much less thrive, it has to be with the entire company being adaptive, not just the top of the pyramid.
I know you're, we're coming to a close, but I think the segue into closing is we basically have 4 pillars of leadership. And one of the most significant one is change management, which is that adaptability. You got to be moving on the fly. And I know some of us have been around here 40 years, have been through 4 different recessions and learned the importance of adaptability, and knowing, once you know that, when you come into the next pandemic, you know what to do in order to be able to overcome it. I can't agree with you more. The other elements is talent development that we look for heavily, because we cannot scale without it. And you did an extraordinary job bringing in the right people at the right place. Okay. And, I guess the third one, which I think is very important, is we believe in the whole idea of relationship building with the entire community. I mean, the entire community. It's just not a supplier relationship or a customer relationship. It is our relationship with our community. How do we fit in? How do we contribute? How do we make a difference? And that is something that I think you guys are doing on a large scale, and seeing just incredible results. I just hope that we can participate with you to move this thing even faster. I mean, my biggest frustrations is I want to get it now. you know, I want to be able to do what you're saying. But it's very difficult to build a tribe today, especially with everybody having a computer and having a podcast and every single proprietor starting their business, delivering value propositions. And, you know, the noise out there is so big right now, you know, and sometimes what it does, it overwhelms the message to be heard, right? So it's really nice when you take the time to write a book and the things that you're doing, because I do believe it's all about example setting, okay, and living and walking the talk and delivering the message. And I like you. I just think it's the greatest message you can. How are you going to close the gap between the have and the have-nots, right? I mean, that's really what it really comes down to, right? Someone's got to come up with that solution, and I'm proud to know that you're one of the guys that knows how to and have figured it out. My hat's off to you.
Well, I'm not figured it out yet, but I've been able to progress on the journey thanks to you and the great game of business.
Well,
And that is the truth. All right?
You're kind.
I'm a lucky guy.
So come to Missouri, I'll take you fishing, just like we did at time where you and your son and I, and
Yes, indeed.
he got a strong topwater bite. There's nothing. I'll bet he remembers that topwater bite
Yes,
better than anything.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, it was nice.
We can't wait to come back. I think
All
you'll
right.
be seeing me as soon as we get this COVID behind us.
That's all.
Please see us.
All right. And likewise for you to come and visit me in upstate New York.
Soon as the virus is under control.
All right, guys.
Thanks, Martin.
Thank you.
God bless you.
All right. God bless you too. Bye-bye.
Well, Martin, thank you so much. Jack, thank you as well. This has been a great discussion. I've just taken so many notes. I do like the fact that you guys have really kind of identified this idea that change really does start at the top. It's one of our core values and one of our higher laws of business. But the real change happens when we allow that environment to reach people and that education, and then it's a groundswell. It's really got to be, you know, the support comes from beneath, from bottom to top. So that's some big lessons there. You can't boil the ocean. I think another good takeaway. And the couple of books that I wanted to point out, you mentioned for our listeners, The New Geography of Jobs and the Startup Community Way that you recommended. And of course, I heard there's a great book called More Good Job, an Entrepreneur's Action Plan to Create Change in Your Community. Folks, you can learn more about Martin and everything he's doing in his community at moregoodjobs.org. Martin Babinec, Jack Stack, thank you so much.
Stephen,
Rich Armstrong.
Stephen, let me just end with one thing, and it's also to promote the book. The fourth element of our leadership pillars is strategic planning. Okay. And I know we covered a little bit in the presentation, but there's also a lot in that book about the importance of it. And so we're totally aligned, Martin. We are totally aligned. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Great, Martin. Thank you so much.